In 1998, a young couple moved into an old Victorian house in upstate New York. One room at the far end of the second floor always seemed colder than the rest of the house. No matter the season, it was silent, too silent. Not even the creaks of the old wood floors could be heard. Curiosity got the better of the husband, who decided to spend the night there. He set up a chair and a camera, hoping to document the quiet. By morning, the camera's memory card was empty, but the man insisted he'd heard something. Faint whispers and a lullaby sung in a language he didn't recognize. When his wife pressed him for details, he turned pale and said, "It wasn't just one voice. They were all around me." Later research revealed the house had been an orphanage in the late 1800s, and the room in question had been where the children slept. A family in rural England bought their dream home, a cottage surrounded by picturesque fields. But they quickly noticed something strange. At night, the walls seemed to breathe. The wallpaper would ripple, as if someone were exhaling behind it. The family dismissed it as drafts or old plumbing, until the youngest child claimed she could see faces in the wallpaper. The parents brushed it off as a child's imagination. But one night, they all heard a deep, guttural sigh coming from the walls. The father tore down a section of wallpaper in the living room and discovered a hollow cavity filled with old, decayed wood and what looked like human teeth embedded in the beams. Local historians later uncovered that the cottage had been built on the site of an unmarked mass grave dating back to the 1700s. In 2012, a landlord in Chicago rented out a small, one-bedroom apartment in a century-old building. The tenant, an elderly woman, paid her rent on time and kept to herself. After several months, she stopped answering calls, and the landlord entered the apartment to find it completely empty, as though she'd never lived there. All of her belongings were gone, except for an old rocking chair, which faced a corner of the room. The landlord, thinking she'd simply left without notice, put the unit back on the market. But every tenant who moved in complained of the rocking chair creaking late at night, even though the chair had been removed. One tenant swore they saw the elderly woman sitting in the corner, staring at the wall. The landlord eventually learned that a woman matching her description had lived in that unit decades earlier and had died there, sitting in that very chair. In a quiet suburb of Texas, a family moved into a modern house with a peculiar quirk. The lights in the basement couldn't be turned off. Even when the bulbs were unscrewed, the room remained faintly illuminated by a dim, unnatural glow. One night, the father ventured into the basement to investigate, armed with a flashlight and his phone. He descended the stairs but never returned. His wife found him hours later, sitting at the bottom of the stairs, staring blankly into the darkness. "There's someone down there," he muttered, refusing to elaborate further. The family moved out a week later. The house was sold to a new owner, who reported the same phenomenon and who eventually boarded up the basement entirely. In 1975, a family in New Orleans moved into a grand, historic mansion. Almost immediately, they noticed a recurring sound. Quiet sobbing, as though someone were crying in the walls. The sound was most prominent in the attic, which they avoided after discovering old, blood-stained sheets stuffed into a corner. One night, the mother followed the sound and found herself standing outside the attic door. She opened it to see a woman in an old-fashioned dress sitting on the floor, her face in her hands, crying softly. When the woman looked up, her face was a hollow void. The family fled the house and never returned. Locals claimed the house had belonged to a woman who lost her children in a fire, and her spirit remained, grieving eternally.